any plans for marriage? By the time the interview is over, tell me.
I'll be back here.
On the bench.
Siringi,
Yeah.
Will be good time. Faith will be by your side.
Yeah.
Maringo, Kando.
That has been JKO.
This is KTN News.
The United Nations is putting South Sudan warmongers on notice as violence spreads to the outskirts. Zimbabwe's economic woes continue with a short supply of foreign currency, including the dollar and rand. Trump accuses Clinton's Syria policy, saying it amounts to a call for a third war. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here on KTN News for World View on this 26th day of October 2016. Well, it's a pleasure to have you tuned in. My name is Akisa Wandera. Now, we begin the news about South Sudan, where the United Nations is expressing concern that the rise in hate speech in the South could result in mass killings. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, said through his spokeswoman that animosity between South Sudan's Dinka ethnic group and the people of its southwestern equatorial region surged this month.
Letters with graphic warnings of violence against Equatorians have been left outside the offices of several humanitarian organizations in Awel West, in northern Bahr el Ghazal, in the northwestern part of the country. Ethnic Dinka youth groups have issued warnings to Equatorians that they will be eliminated. There is always an undercurrent of ethnic strife in the country, and attacks continue on an almost daily basis. This one represents a rise in the rhetoric, in the very hateful rhetoric, and these are threats, very specific threats that are being made against a specific community. We are raising the alarm because given the volatile situation in the country, these kinds of threats, these are not mere words that are spoken. These kinds of threats can have an explosive effect. So the news of these killings of Dinka civilians who were on a bus, it spread across the country along with the rumors about what exactly happened, and that has sparked this ethnic kind of hatred between the groups. These letters that have been drafted allegedly by Dinka youth and posted at humanitarian organizations, they contain very severe warnings of what these people are going to do to Ecuadorians if they do not leave the country.
And still in South Sudan, a military spokesperson last week said attacks on government troops have left almost 50 people, including soldiers, dead and dozens wounded. There have also been attacks on civilians on major highways leading in and out of South Sudan's capital, Juba, which the army believes Riek Machar's forces are responsible for. Now, the army also maintains that South Africa should not have allowed the former vice president into the country and is calling on the rest of the world to issue a travel ban against Machar as long as he continues to wage war on South Sudan.
At the end of it all, Riek will be held accountable For example, the attacks on civilians at Jalhak and Rom. These were fighters operating under the overall command of Jonathan Oloy. These are very clear things. The same thing in southern Ligi State. The area commanders are known. If we are not able to bring them to justice, the international community will bring Riek Machar to justice.
Well, and thus top two stories we had at the hour bring us to our Twitter poll question at this hour. We ask you, do you believe sanctions against South Sudan will stop the conflict? Do you believe sanctions against South Sudan will stop the conflict? We would love to engage with you. Tweet us at KTN News, or you can tweet me at Akisa Wandera, and definitely I will be sampling some of your views before the end of the program. Now, moving on, Zimbabwe's fragile economic situation is lurching towards a fresh depths amid indications that United States dollar denominations are disappearing from circulation. Now, the development has triggered speculation of a conspiracy to wipe out US dollar notes to pave way for the planned introduction of bond notes, a local currency, by the government. Last week, Zimbabwe cleared its 15-year-old financial arrears with the International Monetary Fund, a first step towards a new IMF loan program for the cash-starved country. The country settled obligations of about $108 million by transferring part of its cash holdings at the IMF to the fund's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. Zimbabwe had been in continuous arrears since the year 2001.
Hyperinflation crisis. So this basically reflects the declining confidence in the economy.
When I started to work, it was in 2010. Things were okay. The US dollar had just been introduced, the multi-currency regime, and everything changed overnight from the situation that we had known before. And things were available in the shops now, people had jobs, and business was booming.
That in itself means nothing, or in isolation it doesn't mean anything, because Zimbabwe still has to pay off the World Bank over $1 billion and the African Development Bank over $600 million. So the payment to IMF cannot be taken in isolation. It has to be encompassing with, it has to be accompanied by other payments to other MFIs, with those, and also a comprehensive reform package.
Meanwhile, Africa is expected to grow at least 3%, according to the latest economic report by the International Monetary Fund. The report points that a majority of oil-exporting nations, mainly in West Africa, will continue to experience subdued growth owing to a fall in commodity prices across the globe. Only 23 countries in Africa will weather the commodity, with Kenya being among the listed countries. The report suggests that Kenya is poised to experience robust growth in 2016, anchored on a stabilizing macroeconomic environment. Speaking during the launch of the Regional Economic Outlook for 2016, IMF's head of Africa noted that public debt in the continent was rising and appealed for fiscal consolidation to avert a crisis in debt levels.
At the moment, our projection is for there to be a growth rebound fairly similar to the previous slowdowns. So we're projecting growth next year to go up to 3%, and then further to 4.5% and beyond from 2018 onwards. So we are basically saying kind of this slowdown will be broadly similar to previous ones. However, this is predicated on very prompt policy action, particularly in the commodity exporters. And there are very, very significant risks to this outlook. If policy action is delayed, but of course in some countries there's uncertainty around political events, including elections. Also a few global environmental risks, but I think these are fairly subdued for the time being, hopefully.
And in the United States, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump says Hillary Clinton's foreign policy plan in Syria would trigger World War III. He said the U.S. should focus on defeating the so-called Islamic State rather than convincing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to stand down. Clinton has been proposing a no-fly zone over Syria, which some say could lead to conflict with Russian jets. The Clinton campaign dismissed the criticism.
Anywhere in the world, people don't realize how important strategically the Philippines are. Did he actually make that statement? Well, he probably made a deal with China, because he left for China, and he's dealing with China and Russia. Well, the Philippines are a very important strategic location. He has no respect or liking of Obama. You saw that 2 weeks ago when, the trip was canceled and the things he said. I'd want to see how the feel is of the people, because I'd want to find out whether he's representing the mass, the majority of the people. I think it's a horrible thing that the United States is reduced to being thrown out of a country. Well, she has no plan for Syria, and look, with her you'll end up in World War III. She doesn't know what she's doing, just like with Libya, just like with everything else she's done. So Syria now is no longer Syria. Syria is Russia and the new Iran that we built through the Iran deal, which is one of the worst negotiated deals I've ever seen. What we should do is focus on ISIS. We should not be focusing on Syria.
Well,
You'll end up with her plan. You'll end up in World War III with Syria. You're going to end up, Steve. You're going to end up in World War III over Syria if we listen to Hillary Clinton. She's incompetent. Well, Syria is fighting ISIS also. I say the first thing we have to do is get rid of ISIS before we start thinking about Syria. The president missed his time. If he wanted to take Syria, he should have done it a long time ago when he drew the line in the sand. That's when he should have taken care of Syria. If we had party unity, we couldn't lose this election to Hillary Clinton. And I do have party unity at the base. We have more unity probably than they've ever seen. But if the Republicans could come back into the tent, we could not lose this election.
Meanwhile, a day before her 69th birthday, Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton said her last debate against her rival Republican Donald Trump was like an early gift. Clinton, who campaigned in Florida, however, says she is worried about rival Donald Trump's refusal to concede defeat if he lost the November 8th election. According to the Reuters Ipsos States of the Nation project, Trump is in most of the states that Trump would need to win, has a chance of amassing the 270 electoral college votes needed to capture the White House.
Now, I got to ask you, did anybody see the last debate? Well, the good news was it was the last debate. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, you're right. That last debate was like an early birthday present, right? In America, we don't say we're going to keep you in suspense about whether we will respect the outcome of an election. We have free and fair elections and the peaceful transfer of power. That is one thing that makes America great. It makes America who we are. But we are not going to change the fundamental values that made America the greatest nation in the history of the world. I think this all started when George Washington refused to become a king, right? Now, Donald Trump probably would have called him a loser. Instead, that was one of the most important decisions any president has ever made. 8 years, it's time to move on. We fought a revolution so that we would not have a king. We would not be subjects. We would be independent citizens.
Meanwhile, President Barack Obama trolled Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, making Trump the punchline for jokes On ABC's late-night show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, Obama read aloud a series of mean tweets culminating in one from Trump, and I quote, "President Obama will go down as perhaps the worst president in the history of the United States," end of quote. Obama also revealed he has been called on a special phone by his bed, a quote, 3 or 4 times in the middle of the night during his time in office to deal with emergencies, including when the 2011 tsunami hit Japan.
Thought of a little skit, and we decided we were going to putt on the carpet in the Oval Office, and somebody grabbed a glass, and so we were trying to putt in the glass, and he won repeatedly. I mean, he kept on. The glass was rigged. And look, there have been maybe 3 or 4 instances where you do get a call in the middle of the night. So, for example, when the typhoon hit Japan, Fukushima. Right. And you're not sure what exactly is going to be happening. It's the other side of the world, so it's the middle of the night. And we had to deploy our experts and our military to make sure that any potential nuclear disaster was contained, and we helped the Japanese. So things like that will happen every once in a while. But for the most part,
they let you sleep.
For the most part, they let me sleep. But as I've mentioned before, what I don't do is, like at 3 a.m., I don't tweet about
You don't tweet anymore?
people who've insulted me.
Well, when you watch the debate and you watch Donald Trump, do you ever laugh? Do you ever actually laugh?
Most of the time.
Elsewhere, Halloween masks depicting White House hopefuls Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are selling well in the Mexican border town of Juarez, which shares a bridge with El Paso in Texas. The detailed display features a wall complete with a Trump Tower, a Trump deportation center, and zombies and skeletons. Masks are used in celebrating the Day of the Dead, which is a Mexican holiday celebrated in particular the Central and South regions and by people of Mexican ancestry living in other places, especially the United States. All right, now for decades on end, food security has proven a stubborn problem the world over. Part of the Sustainable Development Goals is to rid the world of this problem. It is for this reason that specialists in nutrition, food production convene in Nairobi this morning to discuss the challenges and likely solutions.
Many rural communities are in the grip of hunger the world over, and this is set to continue into next year according to the World Food Programme. More than 60 million people, 2/3 of them in East and Southern Africa, are facing food shortages because of drought linked to El Nino, a warming of sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean, according to the United Nations. Prevalence of acute malnutrition among children aged below 5 also stands at 5.7, the highest level in 15 years.
Over the last couple of months, we've seen increasing rates of malnutrition in various parts of the country due to the El Nino-induced drought. That also has an impact on people living with HIV/AIDS, in that they will not be able to access enough food which they need necessarily to make sure that the drugs they're taking every day are having the intended effects.
Far from the El Nino-caused drought, other parts of the continent are reeling from the effects of civil conflicts that have spiraled into an acute food shortages. Without more donor support, the emergency caused by Boko Haram in Nigeria will become the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Despite the fact that it's one of the largest operations of ICRC in the world, it is a forgotten crisis where people outside of Niger, outside the Lake Chad region, do not really offer the attention which this conflict deserves and which the people deserve.
And I think a big challenge is making sure that we are getting all of the patients who need to come here. So the very sickest patients who live far away, who need blood, who need oxygen, we're the only facility in the area that can give them those things.
The UN had appealed for $739 million to cover needs across the entire affected region, known as the Lake Chad Basin, but has received commitments for just $197 million. The United Nations had not declared a famine in the Lake Chad Basin, but the UN officials warned that 65,000 people are living in famine-like conditions. Goal 2 of the Sustainable Development Goals focuses on ending hunger, poverty, and ensuring food access to vulnerable groups, ending all forms of malnutrition, and achieving internationally agreed targets on stunting and wasting in children under 5, doubling the agricultural productivity and the incomes of small-scale producers, particularly women, indigenous peoples, family farmers, pastoralists, and fishers, including through secure and equal access to land by 2030, ensuring sustainable food production systems and implementing resilient agricultural practices that increase productivity and production, that help maintain ecosystems, that strengthen capacity for adaptation on climate change. To achieve this, however, mechanisms will have to be put in place across the globe to end food scarcity once and for all. Trix Ingado, KTN News, Nairobi.
All right, that story by Trix Ingado forms the basis of our discussion at this hour. And joining me in studio is two gentlemen who I believe have probably part of the solutions for food security in the African continent. On my immediate left is Dr. Dino Keating, and he is the Deputy Chairman for the Association of International Research and Development Centers for Agriculture. Good morning.
Good morning, Akisa.
Thank you
for inviting me on the show.
Thank you for coming in. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
All right, and we also have Dr. Dennis Rwangi, who is the Director General of the Center for Agriculture and Bioscience International. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're well? How is your morning?
Very well, actually. Traffic was a bit horrible, but yeah.
Welcome to Nairobi. Thank you very much for coming in, gentlemen. And I'll start with you, Dr. Rwangi. We've seen the issue of food security is a concern, not partly to any country, but to the continent at large. Are we heading towards the right direction when it comes to realizing the Sustainable Development Goal 2?
I think we are definitely heading the right way. As you know, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs as they're called, were agreed upon in September of last year. And as a continent, since the time mechanisms are beginning to being put in place. More recently, Africa has established a Sustainable Development Goal Center based in Kigali to really help us to see how we can address this problem in a very concerted effort as a continent. So I think we have started on a right note, and I think we are starting very early on. And I believe that unlike with the MDGs, I think this time Africa will be better prepared to really meet those challenges.
How are we going to, what are some of the measures we would put in place to meet these challenges that we are facing as a continent now?
I think, first of all, investment in agriculture is very, very critical. We've been talking about agriculture being the driver of most of the economies in Africa. So I think if we can get our governments and the political leadership to really focus on agriculture, in my view, I think we'll be doing the right thing in terms of addressing the issue. And I think also in terms of involving all the stakeholders in a more cohesive and a seamless way.
All right. Yeah. Dr. Keating, currently Kenya is experiencing a drought. About 23 counties are affected. Almost 1 million Kenyans are affected by this current situation. And it's not only in Kenya we see such situations. We see it in other parts of the continent. You deal with research most of the time. Where are we getting wrong that we would have El Nino, massive rains, an abundance of it, then later we would have a drought? Where are we getting it wrong as a continent?
Well, in fact, this is historically something that's happened many times over the centuries and will continue to happen. The important thing for the farming community here is to be resilient so that their enterprises can, in fact, cope with these ups and downs of wet and dry. And there are ways for good agronomy now which can help cope better, not completely, but better than farmers are doing at the moment, when they tend to be dependent very much on single maize crops. There are other better things perhaps to grow in association with that.
Such as?
Well, for example, medium maturing pigeon pea is a very nutritious vegetable. It's drought tolerant because it's very deep rooted. And that would be, to have some of that on your shamba would be a way of helping to cover these rather dry periods when maize is less productive.
When you're talking about, of course, you're talking about the alternative crops that we would grow to suffice for what we've been doing over and over the years. Which direction should farmers be heading now?
Well, first of all, you talked about food security.
Yes.
I don't actually believe that's the major problem. It is food and nutritional security is the major problem. Malnutrition, both lack of vitamins and minerals, is the important issue for human health here in Kenya. And so therefore the major piece of advice we would offer farmers is to try to, in fact, have a better range of crops growing on their farms, which helps cope with those nutritional requirements for their family. So most people in Kenya, in fact most people in the world, don't eat enough fruit and vegetables. And they don't eat it because it's expensive. Grow it on your own farm and you've solved the problem.
Do you think African governments, Dr. Wangi, do you think African governments are committed to achieving the SDG 2?
I think they are. I mean, like I've said already, I think the establishment of a center to really focus on addressing SDG 2 and other SDGs it shows that clear commitment. But I think recently I think a month ago there was a big meeting in Nairobi in the AGRF, and then we had the TICAD meeting and all that. And all these things, African presidents, they said the right things, and I think the political leadership is showing that commitment. I think if we don't do anything, then we are dealing with a booming population that will be very restless, and we've got to act. So I don't think there's any choice at all. I think the leadership, I'm convinced, is doing something about it.
What makes food security and nutrition such a challenge in the continent?
I think what makes it, number one, I think, first of all, we come up with very good policies. But at the end of the day, we tend to have problems of implementation. So it's one thing having policies, but it's one thing enforcing those policies and making sure that we are providing the investment to make sure that we are realizing what we've agreed. So that's part of the problem. Number two, I think a lot of research has been done or being done, but then again, taking that research and making sure that it's having the right impact on the ground is another concern. And weak systems in terms of just looking at extension. I think if you look at Africa, the only country that has got very strong extension system, and actually it's quoted as one of the best after China, is Ethiopia. And you can see that they're making a lot of impact. And I think that's an example that we need to emulate. And so I think all the ingredients are there. Operationalizing all these issues is what is eluding us. But I think the leadership is beginning to take a step back and looking at where things have gone wrong and making sure, because Africa cannot continue begging.
Yes.
Africa must learn to feed itself and probably feed the rest of the world.
Given how rich we are, we have very rich land, so it should be very embarrassing for us to keep begging as a continent.
Exactly.
But to you, Dr. Keating, earlier, as I'd mentioned, the drought situation is when an African down at the grassroots levels thinks about food security, the first question that comes to their mind is, will I be food secure? Will my children be food secure 10 years from now? From the kind of research you've done, is there any sustainable solutions to the perennial drought that some African countries face?
Well, as I said, drought will recur and recur. And we need to put farming systems into place that can be resilient within that context. And yes, there are plenty of things that can be done. But the most important thing that the media can help us with is that most people lack the knowledge of understanding that they are malnourished to begin with, and B, how they can cope with that. So, for example, we all know that the World Health Authority recommends you eat 5 a day and it should be 400 grams of fruit and vegetables, but do you know what that actually looks like? Because the weight of a soccer ball is the amount of fruit and vegetables you have to eat every day to meet that 400 grams.
And most of us don't do it.
That's right. And so therefore, if we can in fact better educate farming families, particularly women, householders, in the need for getting a properly balanced diet into their children, I think that the farming system that then follows logically from that is a much more resilient one, and one which can cope with not only drought, but you have to expect flooding to follow it.
Yes. So according to you, the lack of information in the public also hinders the achievement of food security and nutrition.
Well, absolutely. The knowledge that many children are malnourished, particularly from women's early pregnancy and birth, is something that we know how to cure. But it is not a knowledge that is freely available outside amongst the media. If all doctors, all nurses, all media people, all agriculturalists are saying, feed young women better before they become pregnant, then we're much less likely to have malnutrition problems in the future.
Dr. Rangi, do you think Africa will ever get to a point where it feeds itself?
Definitely so. I think there's no question. I think all the efforts that we're putting in place are not going to be in vain. We are here, for example, in the last 2 days, having a meeting called the Global Action Plan for Agricultural Diversification, and we are looking at diversifying our feeding habits from the 4 main crops that the world is dependent on. And Africa's got quite a number of indigenous crops that we've been used to growing, that can really help tide us away from the food insecurity issues. So, and I think people are beginning to be aware of that people begin to be health conscious, and in so doing, people are going more to these traditional vegetables. And I think what we really need to do is to, going back to what Dino just said, we need to create markets for those food products so that people can grow them, knowing that there will be a place to sell them in addition to eating them. So I think we are putting all efforts in place to really make sure that we're going to be food secure. And I think in 10 years' time, the way Africa is going, there is a strong realization that agriculture is what is going to sort us out, and a lot of effort is being put in agriculture. So there's no question that we'll get there. We will get there at different speeds as countries,
yes,
but we'll definitely get there as a continent.
Yeah, you're saying something?
Could I add something to that? It's ironic that Kenya, sitting on its northern doorstep, has one of the most nutritious vegetables known to man, moringa, the drumstick tree. It is the very high levels of vitamin A and vitamin C and high levels of iron and zinc. It's ideal for diets for young children and women, and yet it's not exploited. You go to the Philippines, they're growing it all over the place.
All right, so something to pick from that. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in. We could go on and on, but I understand you do not have too much time. But of course, that is Dr. Rangi, who is the Director General of the Center for Agriculture and Bioscience International. Thank you for coming in. And of course, Dr. Dino Keating, he is the Deputy Chairman for the Association of International Research and Development Centers for Agriculture. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming in. And at this point, we'll take a short break. Do not go too far. We still have a lot lined up for you here on KTN Worldview. Coming up, why empty shelves could spell doom for the survival of Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro.
This is KTN News.
What can a story do? A story can be born. Sometimes a story can cry.
Watuletee mwili ya mtoto wetu.
Our forces are ready to do their duty.
Or even pray. A story can also laugh. And at other times, it can run.
What a finish! Chad Kamoy from Caribbean Cross.
It has happened each and every year since 1991.
Ice hockey and ice skating may be one of the sports that are not popular in the country.
A story can read too.
Watahiniwa 5101 wamefutiwa matokeo ya mitihani yao ya KCSE
na iwapo wanafunzi watakuwa kwa shule wiki ijayo au walimu wataanza mgomo.
Yet in other times, a story can influence. A story can dream.
This is my mother. She has been my mentor since I was born.
It can travel far and wide.
This week, the Chamada report is in New York.
When it comes to it, a story can count.
The negotiations between Uganda and Kenya regarding the pipeline deal have been moved by another 2 weeks.
An indication of the fast-growing demand in the country.
And at that life-changing moment, a story can stop time. Get the whole story, 24 hours a day, only on KTN News.
This is KTN News.
Let's recap our top story this morning. The United Nations is expressing concern that the rise in hate speech in South Sudan could result in mass killings. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Zaid Ra'ad Al Hussein said through his spokeswoman that animosity between South Sudan's Dinka ethnic group and the people of its southwestern equatorial region surged this month when buses on roads to South Sudan, the capital of Juba, were attacked. They passed through the equatorial region, beg your pardon. The army believes Riek Machar's forces are responsible for those attacks. And of course, that story brings us to our Twitter poll question. At this hour, we ask you, do you believe sanctions against South Sudan will stop the conflict? Do you believe sanctions against South Sudan will stop the conflict? Tweet us at KTN News. You can tweet me at Akisa Wandera, and I will be taking a look at some of your tweets right before the end of the program. All right, it's time to take a look at stories that have been given priority on our international papers. And Trix Ngado will help us take a look at just what is making headlines on the international press. She's now joining us in studio. Good morning, Trix.
Good morning, Akisa.
You're well?
You?
I'm good, I'm good.
So we're starting off today with a new paper. It's called theafrica.com. It's a website that is, of course, from the name, just focusing on what's happening across Africa. And a top story right here is on what happened on Friday last week, the Miss Albinism contest, Mr. and Mrs. I think.
Wow,
so,
it made it to this?
Yes, exactly. So having Kenya flips the script on how albinos are seen. So the article, if you read it, you find that it's going into the troubles that albinos face. They're saying that in Kenya, they're actually sometimes referred to as pesa. So just indicating indicating, pesa means money, so it's just indicating how they're seen as a possible source for cash by people in Malawi and some other countries, and some across the border in Tanzania. They're seen as a way of, they're sold off for money, and of course their bones, as in some African countries, are believed, and in some cultures, to be a source of good fortune and happiness.
The myths that surround
so there are suffering, and there are a lot of documentaries about this. You're having people having their arms slashed off, their fingers, because the people want to sell them off to you know, these dubious wagangas, or you know,
witch doctors,
seers and things like that, who are actually propagating lies. So they're just trying to change the script, flip the script, and tell people that these are people and they're not actually sources of happiness and joy, and you know, you need to change that. And money, actually. So, and also there's this other story about the Oromaya people and the Amharas in Ethiopia, who have been claiming that they're being actually pushed aside. They're the largest group in Ethiopia, but they're facing a lot of discrimination from the government, and there have been a lot of protests. So it's focusing on how they're getting the stories out there, and they have been flooding the internet with their stories, with videos and pictures they've been taking themselves, because they feel that the media, the state media, is biased against them. So they're in contact with people in the diaspora who actually help them to get their story out there, and this has actually attracted a lot of media attention on the international platform. So that's what that's about. And then the people of Botswana have a heat wave to look forward to in the next few weeks. This is how it has been the prediction. The headline for that is Botswana braces itself for a heat wave. You know, this usually has a lot of health implications. People actually die of heat stroke. So this is, of course, something that country has to brace itself for, and people maybe will have to change their lifestyle in one way or another to just, you know, make sure they're not caught up in that. So that's what the Africa.com is heading with.
That looks like a very interesting website.
Then we're having African business that's focusing on the IMF development. Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to slump amid piecemeal reforms. IMF has predicted the growth of Sub-Saharan Africa will fall to 1.496 in 2016, mainly due to declining commodity prices. And of course, you're having oil-producing countries that are making sure they did not want the currencies to shift. Nigeria was one of them that only recently allowed its currency to go down, because they have not been making a lot of profits in terms of the oils, because oil prices shifted across the globe. So that's what's happening on that front. So Africa is supposed to be bracing itself for some tough economic times. Not really tough, but not as rosy as we'd expect. Then you're having the Huffington Post having a very leftist title right there, against Don's new hotels lose Trump from names. So of course, Donald, I don't know if it's due to the bad PR or something, but this is what they're focusing on, and you know, this is a sign of something that's toxic. So probably the name is making them, you know, lose money. So probably they're trying to mitigate and just make sure that they are making more money. We are not losing it during the very bad press. You know,
it's a very bad period as well.
Because you know, his campaign has been spiraling the past few weeks over the comments that were leaked to the media. He was talking very ill of how he handles women, and so, you know, this is, of course, business thrives on good PR. If you're having bad PR, maybe changing your name might help. Let's move on to
and in this case, it would help.
Because I'm sure they're known to be Trump's hotels. Then you're having the New York Times that is focusing on what drives Trump. Fear of losing status, tapes show. So some more leaked tapes just casting a light on Donald Trump's character and what makes him keep going. And of course, he has said that he will only accept the results of the election if he wins. So just pointing to the fact that the only thing that drives him is fear, and of course these tapes have come out just in support of that. And the development in Calais, you're just seeing the refugees that are moving out of that camp that has been referred to as the jungle. Of course, the latest that comes out of Calais is that some refugees have actually set fire to some parts of that camp. So I think they're over and done with it. The conditions right there are very deplorable. So yeah, you can see why some of them would be eager to set it alight. And you're having something on the British airline, or rather airports called Heathrow. It's expanding. What's going to be expected of that? And then the world's 10 most generous countries have been revealed in terms of donations to other countries. I suspect Africa is a huge receiver to some of these donations. And then you're having the CNN, victims of abuse at state home searching for justice. This is an expose by the CNN, just trying to show how these victims are trying to make their voices heard in South Korea. So a lot of focus, when it comes to Korea, we see the abuses coming from North Korea. So this is a huge expose, just showing South Korea's shame in terms of the victims of abuse who have not gotten, the kind of attention they need when it comes to their rights. Then you're having Iraq, coalition huddles as troops inch towards Mosul. So we are having, this story has been at the headline of this website all through from the beginning of last week right to now. They're just taking a look, breaking it down, what's happening in Mosul. According to some articles, 87 civilians have actually died so far, and people are actually moving out of Mosul because they fear for their lives. It is said that the militants are using humans as shields and so of course the people are being caught in the crossfire between the coalition fighters and the ISIL fighters in that city. It's going to take them a while before they win if they are trying to make sure civilians are actually
because they have to ensure that the death of civilians is at the bare minimum.
Exactly. And the UN has warned that this could be catastrophic if not handled properly.
All right. Thank you very much, Trix, for that. Trix Ngado, always here on Worldview at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. just telling you what has been given priority on the international front. Now, British Conservative lawmaker Zac Goldsmith, a vocal opponent of the expansion of Heathrow Airport, has announced his decision to resign from Parliament, describing the project as an outrage. Goldsmith, who represents a constituency near the airport, had previously pledged to quit if Heathrow was given the go-ahead to expand, something which happened earlier on Tuesday. By backing the $22 billion expansion, Britain ended 25 years of indecision with an ambition plan to boost global trade links.
Conservative Council colleagues, they've been delivering for our residents, keeping their promises, keeping our promises, and serving our community. But today, as you know, I have to honour my promise. And so I've resigned as your Member of Parliament, and I'll be standing in the by-election as an independent candidate. Now, I know that there will be some who see the government's decision today not as the outrage that it is, but as an opportunity to advance their party interests. But this election must be a referendum on Heathrow expansion. It is our chance to send a message to government and to Heathrow via the ballot box. And so I'm asking you to give me the mandate I need to continue fighting this fight. Thank you all very much indeed.
Now, supermarket shelves in Venezuela used to be empty. Now they're being restocked, but most goods are unaffordable since the government of Nicolas Maduro decided to stop regulating private sector imports. Slum residents struggle to eat 2 meals a day. Take a look.
Like every day, Edward and his wife wonder whether they'll be able to feed their 2 children. In this impoverished neighborhood in Caracas, finding food is a daily struggle. Edward and Judith usually manage to eat twice a day, but sometimes they only have enough for 1 meal.
There are times when we have nothing to eat. We starve because we can't get anything. Sometimes my husband and I don't have money, and we spend all day without eating. If we eat, it's only a small piece of bread each, with water.
The oil price crunch has unleashed an economic crisis in Venezuela, where the poor have been badly hit by severe shortages of food, medicine and basic goods. Now the upper and middle classes also feel the hardship. Supermarket shelves, which used to be empty, have recently filled up. But aside from a few products with government-regulated prices, most goods are unaffordable. A dozen eggs can cost up to $3, a bag of pasta $6, and a liter of imported oil $17.
11,000 bolívares for this small bag of cookies, a little bit of milk, 3 bananas, a little bit of fish, a little bit of cheese, and a little bit of ham.
In one shopping trip, This woman spent nearly a quarter of the minimum monthly income, 65,000 bolivares. That's about $100 according to the highest official exchange rate. But the value of the dollar doubled on the black market, halving the buying power of the average Venezuelan. Economists say prices have been spiking out of control, reaching black market value since the government of Nicolás Maduro decided to stop regulating private sector imports.
El gobierno de alguna forma se ha hecho de la vista gorda.
In a way, the government's turned a blind eye on this with all the regulations they've implemented. And they've allowed many companies, many importers to start bringing in products, and those products are being sold for black market prices.
Se vendan a precios de dólar libre o dólar negro.
Government-sponsored food plans aimed at the most vulnerable offer a monthly bag of basic goods for $8. Still, many say it's not enough.
We would like to get this twice a month, because this small bag, with a big family like mine, in 1 week it's empty.
As the crisis deepens, government help cannot reach everyone. Judith and Edward haven't received a subsidized bag in 2 months. Their only meal today will be a box of sardines.
Now, Moscow said on Tuesday that Russian and Syrian warplanes have not conducted any airstrikes on the city of Aleppo for the last 7 days and are upholding a moratorium on bombing. A so-called humanitarian pause declared by Damascus and Moscow ran out at 1600 GMT on Saturday, and the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that there were airstrikes afterwards against the opposition-controlled district of Sheikh Said. Moscow had on Monday ruled out early moves to renew its total ceasefire in Aleppo after the brief halt ended, admitting that few people had used humanitarian passages to leave the city.
Zone around Aleppo since October 18. The moratorium on airstrikes by Russian and Syrian planes around the city will be extended.
All right, and that's all we had lined up for you here on KTN News Worldview. And on our Twitter poll question, we ask you, do you believe sanctions against South Sudan will stop the conflict? And 61% of you say no, the sanctions against South Sudan will not stop the conflict. And 39% of you say yes. I'll just go through a number of your tweets. Ibrahim says, a sanction is not a solution and it is against international human rights. South Sudan needs diplomatic policy to end the menace. And Nyaboke Centrin simply says no. Parkwall 13 says, as a South Sudanese, a sanction has no protocol of solving problems. This is some of your views. Bing Charlie says, hard-hitting sanctions targeting individual politicians. Hashtag South Sudan is the only language they understand. These are some of your views. Thank you very much for engaging with us here on Worldview. And up next, Betty Carlo brings you 2 hours of news on News Center. I am Akisa Wandera. Enjoy your morning, the rest of your day. Keep it KTN News, and let's meet at 1 p.m. for KTN News Desk.
KTN News. Get the whole story.
All kinds of garbage litter Miramar Beach in Mozambique's capital, Maputo. A group of a couple dozen volunteers spend their Saturday collecting the garbage. The man responsible for the cleanup operation is environmentalist Carlos Serra Jr. Since forming last year, the group has removed garbage from 4 provinces in 15 cleanup operations like this. They share the results immediately via Facebook and WhatsApp. When we first announced on social media that we are going to do a cleanup, no one cared. But now we've already done 15. And when we announce it now, people say, look, those people don't stop. So I'm also going to think twice before I throw my trash away. Trash obscures Mozambique's natural beauty. With no public trash cans at the beach, garbage can quickly grow. Sorting through the sand for bits of broken glass is a tedious task, but 25-year-old Mauro de Brito believes it has to be done. Do you really believe you'll be able to clean up this entire beach? Well, I would like to leave it really clean. I will do as much as I can. What I cannot do is do nothing and leave this glass. I can at least make some small improvement. At the Mozambican Ministry of Land, Environment and Rural Development, Carlos Serra Jr. heads the legal team responsible for environmental policies and legislation. He says his work has become more effective since he joined the ministry in 2015. It's a matter of putting the government machinery into motion, and it works. It's much easier for an institution like this ministry to approach other public and private institutions or civil society organizations and mobilize them for a common cause. Around 15 kilometers away from Miramar Beach, the mangroves which act as natural filters on the coast are also clogged up with trash. Carlos tells the activists that garbage not properly disposed of in urban areas has a direct impact on marine life once fish and other inhabitants of the sea feed on it. Activist and law student Leopoldina Gouveia reacted immediately. It was an instinct. I can't eat fish anymore. I just can't. I haven't got the courage, because to eat fish is to eat trash. Because the fish eat the garbage we throw into the sea. The animals eat the waste we throw away. Carlos Serra Jr. wants to change society's mentality concerning how people deal with waste. He wants Mozambicans to understand the value of nature and appreciates its beauty as he does. It is important to contribute to a process of change, to help people stop doing things the same old way, to show that doing nothing is very wrong. But it could take some time for environmental awareness to become the norm here. Judging by this weekend, the activists still have a lot of work to do to keep Mozambique's beaches clean.
Female genital mutilation (FGM) is against the law in Kenya.
Wasichana wakisha keketwa, sasa ni kuozwa.
But it continues to happen, especially in rural areas within pastoral communities that are hard to reach.
They are doing it for their own cultural reasons.
Mama